It's a hell of a thing, killing a man. Unforgiven, 1992, wasn't just a Western. It was a quiet demolition of the genre itself. What seems slow and reflective was shaped by years of delay, harsh conditions, and a director waiting for the right moment. Scenes shifted on set. Actors were pushed beyond comfort. Nothing came easy. Today we uncover 15 weird facts about Unforgiven, plus one bonus detail that changes everything. Watch closely. The script was written years before, but no one was ready. It wasn't written for Clint Eastwood. It was written for a different era. The script for Unforgiven originally existed under the title The Cut Whore Killings in the late 1970s, at a time when the Western genre was fading fast. Studios weren't interested, and audiences were moving on, leaving the script abandoned and untouched. But something about it refused to disappear. When Clint Eastwood finally read it, he didn't rush into production. He waited, because he understood something most filmmakers ignore. He wasn't old enough yet. This wasn't a story about strength. It was about regret. And Eastwood believed he needed to grow into William Money, a man shaped by his past rather than defined by it. So he held on to the script for nearly a decade. That delay changed everything. By the time filming began in the early 1990s, the tone had evolved into something far deeper. What could have been a simple revenge story became reflective, human, and heavy. What audiences didn't know was that the emotional weight didn't come from performance, it came from time itself. Clint Eastwood directed it like a final goodbye. It wasn't just another project, it felt like an ending. By the time Unforgiven went into production, Clint Eastwood had already built a legendary career playing iconic figures, from The Man with No Name to Dirty Harry. But instead of reinforcing that image, he quietly dismantles it. Behind the scenes, his directing style becomes unusually restrained. Minimal takes, quiet sets, no unnecessary direction. He avoids flashy camera movements and dramatic musical cues because this isn't about spectacle, it's about truth. Eastwood once made it clear that he wanted to strip the Western down to its core, removing the myth and exposing what violence actually costs. That decision shapes every moment of the film. Gunfights feel slower, heavier, and uncomfortable. Silence becomes just as powerful as action. What audiences didn't realize was that Eastwood wasn't simply directing a film, he was confronting his own legacy, not celebrating it, but questioning it. Gene Hackman almost didn't take the role. It wasn't an easy decision. It was a reluctant one. Gene Hackman initially hesitates to take on the role of Little Bill Daggett, a character defined by control, brutality, and quiet authority. He has concerns about portraying violence in a way that could be misunderstood or glorified. He doesn't want to contribute to something that presents cruelty without consequence. But Eastwood reassures him. This film isn't about glorifying violence, it's about exposing it. That promise changes everything. Once Hackman commits, his performance becomes deeply controlled and unsettling. On set, he maintains a distant, almost cold presence. But especially during scenes where Little Bill asserts power, there's no exaggeration, no theatrical outbursts, just quiet, controlled intimidation. What audiences didn't know is that Hackman's initial discomfort actually strengthens the role. It isn't just acting, it's resistance. And that internal tension is exactly what makes the character so disturbing to watch. Morgan Freeman brought calm in a chaotic shoot. It wasn't loud, it was steady. Morgan Freeman's portrayal of Ned Logan carries a calm, grounded presence that extends far beyond the screen. Behind the scenes, that same energy becomes essential to the production. Filming conditions are far from easy. Weather shifts constantly, mud covers the ground, and long outdoor shoots push the cast physically. Tension occasionally rises, as it does on demanding productions. But Freeman becomes a stabilizing force, not through authority, but through consistency. He approaches every scene with quiet focus, no ego, no rush, and that calm begins to influence the entire set. While Eastwood runs things efficiently, it's Freeman's steady presence that helps maintain emotional balance, especially during scenes dealing with violence and moral weight. What audiences didn't see was how crucial that stability was. Without it, the tone of the film could have easily drifted into chaos. Instead, everything remains controlled, measured, just like Ned Logan himself. The film's violence was intentionally uncomfortable. It wasn't designed to excite, it was meant to unsettle. Most Westerns build toward action, presenting violence as controlled, precise, even heroic. Unforgiven does the opposite. It slows everything down. Gunfights feel awkward, messy, and unpredictable. Characters miss shots, hesitate, and struggle in ways rarely shown in the genre. And that's intentional. Eastwood wants to remove the illusion of control, to show that real violence isn't clean. It's chaotic and uncertain. During filming, scenes are carefully constructed to avoid stylization. There's no dramatic slow motion, no exaggerated reactions, just impact. What audiences didn't know is that this approach made even the cast uncomfortable at times. Without cinematic distance, everything feels closer, more personal, and that discomfort becomes the film's defining strength. Because instead of watching violence from a safe distance, you feel its weight directly, and that changes everything. The rain scene was a production nightmare. But it wasn't cinematic magic. It was persistence under pressure. The final confrontation takes place in heavy rain, adding tension and atmosphere to one of the film's most important sequences. But filming it is anything but smooth. Rain machines soak the set. Mud makes movement unstable. Visibility becomes limited. Actors struggle to keep their footing, while equipment constantly needs adjustment. Lighting becomes unpredictable, forcing the crew to adapt repeatedly. And yet, Eastwood refuses to complicate the process. No excessive retakes, no overproduction, just repetition until the moment feels right. What audiences didn't know is how physically exhausting those scenes were to film. The cold, the wet conditions, the discomfort, it all becomes part of the performance. And that's exactly why the scene works. Now, because what you see on screen isn't just acting, it's real strain, real effort, and real tension captured in the moment. The film quietly rejects heroism. It wasn't about heroes. It was about consequences. William Money isn't introduced as a legend or a figure of power. Instead, he appears as someone struggling with basic control, falling off his horse, missing shots, doubting his own abilities. That portrayal isn't accidental. Eastwood deliberately removes every traditional heroic element that Westerns had relied on for decades. Because this story isn't about glory, it's about damage, about what happens after the myth fades. What audiences didn't realize is just how radical this approach was. For years, Westerns built their identity on strong, confident figures who defined justice through action. Unforgiven dismantles that idea completely. It replaces certainty with doubt, strength with vulnerability. And in doing so, it reshapes the genre itself, not by making it louder or more intense, but by making it quieter, more reflective, and far more honest. The film's pace was a risk. Studios didn't like. It wasn't fast. It was deliberate. Studios worried the film was too slow, too quiet, too reflective, because nothing explodes early, nothing demands attention immediately. But Eastwood refuses to change it. He trusts the pacing. And that decision pays off, because instead of immediate impact, the film builds tension gradually. What audiences didn't know was that this pacing nearly caused studio interference, but Eastwood's reputation gave him control, and that control preserved the film's identity. Real aging became part of the performance. It wasn't makeup, it was real. Eastwood and Freeman weren't trying to appear older, they were older, and that reality shapes everything. Movement is slower, reactions are heavier, even silence carries more weight. What audiences didn't realize was that the film's authenticity comes from this, not performance, presence. The cast wasn't sure. How audiences would react. It wasn't predictable. It was uncertain. No one knew if audiences would accept a Western that questions its own foundations. Because this film doesn't reward violence, it questions it. And that uncertainty creates tension behind the scenes. Actors commit fully, but there's always that question, will this work? And if you've made it this far, go ahead and like and subscribe because the next facts reveal what almost went wrong completely. The Schofield Kid represents a shift in perspective. It wasn't just a character, it was a reflection. The Schofield Kid enters the story with confidence that feels familiar. Quick stories, exaggerated claims, the kind of bravado Westerns have always rewarded. He talks like someone who believes the myth. That killing is clean. That reputation is earned through boldness. But as the journey unfolds, that image begins to fracture. When he finally faces real violence, there's no control, no glory, just confusion and shock. And that moment changes him completely. His voice lowers, his certainty disappears. What audiences didn't realize was that this transformation mirrors their own experience. You walk into Unforgiven expecting the same old Western rhythm: heroes, victories, clean endings. But like the kid, you're forced to confront something different, something heavier. By the time the film ends, the illusion is gone, not just for him, but for everyone watching. Eastwood avoided multiple takes on purpose. It wasn't about efficiency, it was about truth. On most film sets, scenes are repeated again and again until every detail is technically perfect. But on Unforgiven, Clint Eastwood does the opposite. He keeps takes to a minimum, often moving on after just one or two. Not because he's rushing, but because he's protecting something fragile: authenticity. First reactions carry unpredictability. Small hesitations, natural pauses, subtle imperfections. They make moments feel real. Repeat those moments too many times. But when they begin to lose that edge, they become polished, but distant. Eastwood understands this, and he builds his entire directing style around it. What audiences didn't know was how much this approach shaped the film's tone. Conversations feel natural, tension feels unforced, even silence feels genuine, because nothing is overworked. In a story built on realism and consequence, that rawness matters more than perfection, and it's what makes every scene feel quietly powerful. The film won awards, but changed the genre more. It wasn't just successful, it was transformative. When Unforgiven, 1992, swept major awards, including Best Picture and Best Director, it looked like a victory lap for the Western genre. But it wasn't a celebration. It was a turning point. For decades, Westerns had relied on clear heroes, clean morality, but when stylized violence. This film dismantles all of that. Violence becomes heavy, consequences linger, characters don't walk away unchanged, they carry what they've done. After Unforgiven, the genre shifts. Filmmakers begin to strip away myth and focus on realism, aging, regret, and moral ambiguity. You start to see fewer legends and more flawed individuals. What audiences didn't realize at the time was that this film didn't revive the Western. It redefined it. Not bigger, not louder, but quieter, more human, and far more honest. And once that shift happens, the genre can never fully return to what it was before. The ending was designed to feel uncomfortable. It wasn't closure, it was confrontation. The final moments of Unforgiven don't offer the satisfaction audiences expect. There's no triumphant music, no heroic framing. Just a man walking away after violence that feels heavy, not victorious. The confrontation in the saloon is sudden and brutal, but what lingers is the silence afterward, the weight. Eastwood deliberately avoids giving the audience emotional relief, because this story isn't about winning, it's about what it costs. William Money doesn't ride off as a hero, he leaves as someone who has returned to something he once escaped. And that realization creates discomfort. What audiences didn't know was that this ending was carefully designed to resist traditional storytelling instincts. It doesn't resolve tension, it leaves it hanging. Because in this world, actions don't fade, they stay. And that's what makes the ending feel so unsettling long after the film is over. The title itself carries hidden meaning. It wasn't just a title, it was a judgment. Unforgiven doesn't point to a single character. It casts a shadow over everyone in the story. At first, it seems tied to William Money, a man with a violent past trying to live differently. But as the film unfolds, that idea expands. Little Bill enforces order through cruelty. The Schofield kid learns the truth behind the stories he believed. Even the world itself feels shaped by actions that can't be undone. No one stands completely clean. And that's where the title gains its weight. It isn't about redemption denied. It's about consequences that never fully disappear. What audiences didn't realize was how deliberately that ambiguity was built into the film. There's no clear moral center, no easy answer, just people carrying what they've done. And in that sense, Unforgiven becomes less of a label and more of a condition that defines the entire world of the story. Unforgiven didn't just tell a story, it rewrote a genre. What looks like a quiet Western is actually a reflection on violence, aging, and consequence. And the more you look at it, the more it changes. So if this made you see the film differently, like, share, and subscribe for more hidden stories behind the movies you thought you understood. Because sometimes, the real story isn't on the screen. It's everything that happened behind it.